All right, welcome back to video number 4 in our special series on upzoning, diving deep into whether it works, whether it doesn't, there are problems, what's going on. We've got to find out because a lot of cities are up to it. And from what we're finding so far is it displaces people, gentrifies areas, maybe erases cool little ethnic neighborhoods and brings in Pilates studios, yoga shops, coffee shops, all those kind of things. Not a lot of good things we're finding so far. Now today, in this video, I've got an article from the Brookings Institute. I'll put the link in the description down below. The title is The Double-Edged Sword of Upzoning. And again, just to remind you, what I'm doing here is reading and correlating and commenting on articles and cross-referencing them so that we can get a really good idea of whether this is good for our city or not. Like I say, my city's doing this now, right? Maybe your city's doing it as well. And if it is, I highly recommend you get involved because what I'm finding, and again, I'm 4 videos in, plus a bunch of other research, what I'm finding is it drives property taxes up and also drives rents up. And that is not a good thing for us in general. So let's get into this. This article was from 2021, written by Jenna Davis. Excuse me. As cities across the country grapple with soaring housing costs, the need for zoning reform is more pressing than ever. Cities are in desperate need of more housing, but exclusionary zoning practices often thwart housing growth. Indeed, a growing body of evidence has identified how exclusionary zoning places artificial constraints on supply, exacerbates residential racial segregation, and contributes to rising housing costs. In response, policymakers have called for zoning reforms that would allow more small homes to be built in expensive markets, which often prohibit non-single family detached homes. President Biden's infrastructure plan, oh boy. You know how I feel about President Biden. Yikes. Anything that guy gets into, run as fast as you can away from it. President Biden's infrastructure plan, which supports awarding grants and tax credits to municipalities that reform their zoning codes to allow multifamily developments in neighborhoods restricted to single-family homes, offers substantial promise to dismantle exclusionary zoning. This could be one reason why cities are getting involved. Cities, oftentimes when the federal government throws a bunch of cash at them, cities kind of lose their mind. I mean, anyone's going to lose their mind if someone throws a bunch of cash at them. This is why I'm not a big fan of taking money from the federal government. There's too many strings attached to it, and the federal government doesn't know or really necessarily care what the needs are, the specific situations are in your city. Taking money from the federal government is pretty big red flag in my opinion. These exclusionary zoning practices, are rooted in a deeply racist history. We've heard a lot about that. We heard a lot about this in the NPR article, and I don't know why they feel the need to continue to harp on it. It is what it is. The past is the past. Why do we need to continue to go down that road? I don't think there's any racism going on nowadays. I think the playing field is very level, but they're bringing that in because it's doing something in the minds of Americans, Side note, America is one of the least racist countries on the planet, but in order for evildoers and people that want to sow chaos and destruction, they've got to keep that triggered. They got to keep that pot stirred and riled up. I'm not a fan of it, right? Morgan Freeman talks about this. He's like, stop talking about it. Like, get on with your lives. This is a waste of time to talk about this. For Pete's sakes, we had a black president, Barack Obama. What's up? How can we be a racist country when that happened? Since the early 20th century, municipalities have wielded local discretion in the land use process to enact a host of exclusionary zoning restrictions. Exclusionary zoning regulations such as zoning ordinances mandating minimum lot sizes, restricted multifamily development, and prevented often working class minority households from moving into predominantly white communities. We now know that these effects are durable. Previous research has found that restrictive land use regulations enacted earlier in the 20th century help explain metropolitan segregation patterns over time. In response, planners and policymakers across the country have renewed calls for cities to reform their zoning codes to allow for denser development, such as allowing duplexes and triplexes in single-family neighborhoods. For example, in 2018, Minneapolis became the first major American city to eliminate single-family zoning. Other cities such as New York and Seattle have turned to upzoning policies, upzoning which increases allowable densities, often by relaxing the zoning code's height and bulk requirements or increasing floor area ratios, aim to encourage denser development, increase housing supplies, and thus improve housing affordability. Now let's talk about that note right there. They may very well increase housing supply. They may very well do a number increase dense development. They will not, based on what we've learned so far, affect housing affordability. Remember, Patrick Condon, planner extraordinaire, architect, what is he, a landscape architect? He ran for some type of maybe mayor of Vancouver. Patrick Condon said that they quadrupled the density in Vancouver, and it did not affect affordability one bit. In fact, Vancouver is super expensive, one of the most expensive places, if not the most expensive places to live in Canada. So their claim that it affects affordability is totally bogus based on what we've learned so far. I'm also interjecting some of my own specific research. Remember, this is video 4. I'm already 3 videos in. You can check them out, the prior videos in the series. But affordability is not one of them. However, upzonings have ignited the hot button issue of gentrification in several cities. Upzoning policies have driven a wedge between those fighting for supply-side solutions and tenant advocates. Supply-side advocates, often those affiliated with the Yes in My Backyard YIMBY movement, have argued that upzonings will improve housing affordability, pointing to recent studies, including one in New York and another in 11 other cities, that have found that new market rate development does not trigger increases in surrounding housing costs. Does not trigger increases in surrounding housing costs. So there's something to think about. Tenant advocates have countered that upzoning will fuel real estate speculation and gentrification, as landlords of upzoned buildings will be incentivized to sell their properties at inflated prices, reflecting their added development potential. That is more what I'm finding personally, right? Even in my neighborhood, there was a property, probably 5 units, maybe 6 or 7. Everyone left about a year ago. They went in and redid the hardwood, the finishes, new windows, new paint on the outside. Now new people are moving in. Now you tell me what you think went down there. But I think what went down there, speculating of course, is that they remodeled the apartment complex, and now they're charging more money for people to live there. That's gentrification, my friends. In doing so, some advocates have pointed to studies such as, and it gives a link to the one in Chicago, suggesting that upzonings are in fact associated with increases in property prices, at least in the short term. Of course, that's what I'm finding. Despite these tensions, minimal empirical work has examined the effects of upzoning on gentrification. Aiming to address this gap in the literature, I recently conducted a study examining how a series of upzonings implemented in New York City in the early 2000s interacted with the subsequent gentrification pressures, using growth in the non-Hispanic white population as a proxy for gentrification. I find that upzoning activity is positively and significantly associated with the odds of a census tract becoming whiter, suggesting that upzonings might accelerate rather than temper gentrification pressures in the short term. Now, this sounds very much like the very first article in this series, video number 1, talking about New York, Soho, NoHo, and that is exactly what they said. It's almost like they were drawing from the same study, but that's what the author of that article said. The neighborhoods became whiter, wealthier, and more crowded. Not good for anyone. Given these findings, should cities continue to uphold upzonings as a core solution to the nation's housing affordability crisis? The answer is that scholars must conduct additional research on upzonings in order to better understand their effects. Upzonings are far from one shape and size. For example, the Seattle City Council recently approved the upzoning of 27 neighborhood hubs throughout the city, requiring that developers building in upzoned areas include below market rate units in their buildings or contribute fees to an affordable housing fund. I'm going to finish the article. There's just one little short blip here, and then I'm going to talk about that market rate units, forcing developers to create market rate units, and my thoughts on that. Portland's recent upzoning measures, which allow up to 4 units on all residential lots throughout the city, allow developers to build up to 6 units per lot if at least half of the units are reserved for low-income tenants. Other upzonings, such as those implemented in New York City in the early 2000s, were not linked to mandatory inclusionary housing, which has since changed under the de Blasio administration. Okay, let's talk about this. Requiring developers to build market rate housing. I'm not a fan of requiring developers to build certain things. I want the developer to look into the marketplace and go, oh, this is what they want and need. This is what they want. This is what the people will buy. We're having a wage gap, right? The middle is becoming non-existent. Lower, you're either going to go down or you're going to go up. You're going to find a way to navigate this crazy world, crazy fiscal environment, monetary environment, which we live, where the Federal Reserve is printing money like nobody's business and causing massive inflation, driving the cost of goods and services up for you and I. You're either going to find a way to go up or you're going to go down. And I've kind of had it with cities thinking that they can solve the problem by artificially making developers do something they wouldn't naturally do. I'm a big fan of like, hey, do what you need to do as a business owner. I don't want to be told what to do as a business owner. I can't imagine they want to be told what to do as a business owner. A better approach, and why I don't know why no one is doing this, a better approach is let's find out why these people aren't making it. What is it? Education? Is it skills? Is it whatever it is, right? We need to bring them up, because the inflation is only going to keep going. You're never going to solve the problem. It's just like if you try to save money, right, and cut your expenses. There's only so low you can go. There's only so low substandard or below market rate housing can go. Let's bring those people up. I don't hear anyone doing that at all. It's ridiculous. Until people start doing that and trying to bring people up or find new creative ways to elevate the income of these people, I don't want to hear anymore about below market rate housing. It's never going to solve the problem. It's like a race to the bottom, right? There's only so low you can go. Pretty soon cities are going to be telling developers you have to build free housing for these people. Like, that's the trajectory. That's not a solution to the problem. All right, side note and tangent there. But I'm going to put the link in the description down below. You can check it out. Video 4 in the books. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for the next video.